there's a recent Gallup workplace survey that says, and I'm going to ask you what you think first. It says, what percentage of the workforce do you think are either quietly quitting or persistently uninspired? I love persistently uninspired. Using chat for me. What percentage in the Gallup Global Workplace Survey of employees are quietly quitting or persistently uninspired? Yeah, no one has got the exact number yet until Rich came flying in at 85%. 85% of the people who are supposed to be working aren't inspired or are quietly quitting. And that's why this session is really, really important. And it's why Blaire Palmer is the crucial person to help us change that stat in your area of responsibility. And the reason Blaire's the right person is that she has wonderfully provocative views about how you do change the workplace. She's an author on the topic, so you can pick up her latest book, which is amazing, Punks in Suits. We can talk a bit about that with Blaire. She also is someone that was a journalist. You're a journalist, Blaire, aren't you?
Yeah.
And background in an iconic radio program called Today, and Blaire was one of the youngest producers of the Today program. She is also, and fairly recently, a competitive bodybuilder, and we'll be talking about that as well.
Wow.
And in this session, there are three main sections, which is I boldly put the number 3 behind me. 3 main sections, and they are not together, emotion and body. Each one of those, we're going to talk about it for about 15 minutes. We'd love to get engagement from the audience as well, be that on chat or any number of ways. But these are the 3 areas that Blaire is going to talk about. Now, Blaire inspired me in January. We were working together in Athens in a conference, and we had a great time together because it was pouring with rain. So we just sat and chatted a lot. And Blaire talked to me about something that she had driven in her own self, a significant change physically. And it inspired me. And I'm back in the gym, Blaire, and it's all your fault.
Yes, sorry about that.
So, Blaire, I am just going to pass over to you. And just can you start by giving us a perspective of everything I've just said in terms of workplace, your views, your radical views of how to change our workplaces and things like that. So right away.
I was a journalist at the BBC working on the Today programme, a producer on the Today programme, was very unhappy. The culture at the time was terrible. In fact, there's a story I tell very often about my editor sticking a post-it to my back on one particular day that said, "I am Satan's mistress," and telling me not to take it off until I'd found a guest for the show. And the reason I couldn't find a guest is because the stories I was researching were not true. So no one wanted to come on the air and talk about them. But anyway, he didn't care much about that. So hence the post-it. So I learned all the wrong ways about organizational culture. And I became a coach, one of the very few accredited coach, one of the first coaches in Europe in 2000. So I've been doing this work for 25 years. And over that time, I've gone from primarily being a coach to now primarily being a speaker and author. Although I do work with clients still, and we'll talk about that at the end. So in that time, my ideas have evolved, but also the world has evolved. And where I'm at today is that we still seem to be operating, most organizations, by a kind of industrial age idea about people and how to motivate them. And so there are 2 beliefs that seem to perpetuate today that underpin so much leadership behavior. One, that people are trying to get away with something. And so you need to have systems and processes in place to stop them. And the job of leadership or management is to stop them getting away with stuff. And secondly, that humans are nothing more than second-rate machines. If you can replace them with machines, fantastic. If you can't, You just get them to operate as much like machines as possible, because what you really value is efficiency and predictability and productivity. Both of those two beliefs then completely undermine our ability as organizations to the humanity, the beautiful humanity of our people, and of course to achieve sustainable change, which is what we're here to talk about. So I think we have to unpick these myths about people. We have to unpick some conventional wisdom about leadership if we need to be successful in driving change in our organizations. So by way of a sort of setup, that's where I'm at, Mark.
Thank you. That's really cool. And let's build on that myth buster. And the first myth is we're all in this together. Tell us more.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard, and I mean, maybe you've even done it, and maybe I've done it too, is to stand in front of a group of people at the launch of a change initiative and say, look, guys, we're all in this together. And the idea of that is to kind of coalition, we're all doing this together, we're all part of one big team, we're all going to move forward together. And I think that's a big mistake, that setup. And I've been in the audience when the leader has been saying that from the stage to a town hall meeting or whatever, and I felt the bristling of people, because it puts a lot of people off. One of the reasons is that, well, the leader is in a very different position in terms of change than the rest of the people in the organization. If you think about a train going through a tunnel, the leader or the leadership, the senior people, because they're not necessarily true leaders, but nonetheless they see themselves as leaders. They're at the front of the train. They saw what was coming before anyone else. Around what was coming, they were able to explore all the options. They were the ones that made the decision about what to do about it and put the plan in place. And now they're saying to people who maybe are only hearing about this for the first time, have no idea about the context, don't have access to this information, have quite a lot of distrust for authority figures anyway, because of the world we live in. They're being told we're all in this together. Those people are further back in the train. So for the people at the top, they've gone through the darkness potentially, and they're coming out into the light, when the rest of the organization is just heading into the darkness. We're not all in this together. And what it leads to in terms of leadership behavior is an ignoring of the very individual journey that the people within the organization are having towards change, and a sort of one size fits all approach to how we're going to take people on the journey, as if everyone is having the same experience at the same time.
How do we change that, Blair? If we recognize that either in ourselves or in our current culture as a communication style, very top down, how do we change that?
Well, it starts earlier. So the first thing that we have to focus on as leaders, I think, is trust. Without trust, and there being two elements of trust, actually, the first being trustworthy, and the second demonstrating a willingness to trust others. That's what creates a culture of trust. Without trust, even if you're standing up there and authentically saying, I'm in this with you, no one really believes you, right? Because they can't trust you as a source of information. So I in the past, I would have said, before you launch change, get trust in place. I can't say that now because change is constant. So you're always going to be in the middle of change, and there's always more change coming. So in the light of that, you have to just start investing in trust from wherever you're at in the change journey in this moment. And like I said, there's two aspects of that. The first being trustworthy. There's a lot of data. I like the Edelman Trust Barometer for this, but there's other data around this, demonstrating that we have lost trust in authority figures and institutions as sources of information. we're more likely to trust leaders in our own organization than anyone else because, well, than leaders outside of our organization, because we know them to an extent and we can see who they are to a greater extent. But nonetheless, you have to make sure you're trustworthy as a source of information. Two aspects of that. The first is to be consistent in words and deeds. So if you said something was important to you, you have to act that way as well. There's no point saying something was important and then betraying those ideals, at some future date. And the other aspect of being trustworthy is removing the mask and revealing who you are as a person, being willing to make authentic human connections with people. Being a human being, a rounded human being, not just a polished version of yourself, because we don't particularly trust polished versions of people.
Yeah, that's so true. And what you're saying triggered with me because I've been working in Chicago this week with a CEO who wants to be better, right? So that helps. I know I need to be better. And a question he asked me was if there was one thing you would change in the way I am, to your point about are your behaviors consistent with the words you preach? He said, if there was one behavior change you would recommend I exhibit, what would it be? And I said, I'm very clear about that. I said, when you get up to present, don't present.
Yeah.
And he said, what? And I said, well, to use your language, myth busting. People think that presentation is me speaking a lot to my audience to inspire them. And in my experience, that doesn't work. So I said, when you get up to present, facilitate, get reaction. So you can say a few things and make some key points and then get a reaction and work with, not at or to. And that's a mindset change. It's also a skill set change, because when you first try and do that as a leader that has always been a preacher leader, even if you're motivational, then that shift from I tell to I ask a lot is a huge one. But I'm hoping that that sort of provocation gets us thinking on this call about, okay, am I a presenter at my team, or do I bring them with me by facilitating? So
Yeah.
that's a useful question. And I'd like to ask people in chat to just reflect on what Blair's been saying in terms of this idea that we're not all in this together. I've got lots of people who I've worked with before on this who are great leaders. So what's your advice? What's your advice about, for leaders, including each of us, what's your advice about how can you connect far sooner than the big change is going to happen, so that you've got people who are clear, people who are with you, people who are in the front of the train with you as you go through the roller coaster? So what advice do you have?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm really looking forward to what's in the chat because, as I said, I started this career as a coach, and so I mean, I do a lot of speaking now, but I am a coach-like speaker. I really like to hear what's going on for people and what's coming up for them. So I've got one eye on the chat.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you asked that, Mark, because there's something that there's something about listening. So
Mhm.
one of the things that I think is important is to be the questions person, not the answers person. And what's typically happened in organizations is that we push information and decision making up. So the higher up you are, the more information you have access to. And information from lower down gets kind of diluted, but pushed up the organization. Then we ask those senior people to make a decision in the light of this slightly dilute information, and then those decisions are pushed down. And so the leader always feels that the way they add value is by knowing the answer and by giving people the answer. And I think that we have to almost reverse that now, where we say the leader is now, of course, they've got access to information, but ultimately they're the questions person. They ask great questions. And whatever information they have, they push down. So the decisions are pushed down and the information is pushed down. And of course, people have information of their own, so they're utilizing that. And in order to be that kind of leader, you have to make that switch from my value comes from having answers to my value comes from asking really great questions that get other people to come up with answers and then own those answers, own those decisions, and go and implement and learn from implementing.
And Blair, there's
Yeah.
some great points in
Mm.
chat. One of the ones that keeps coming back is listen,
Yeah.
which just reinforces the point you just made. You don't have to have the answers. And whether that's as a leader or frankly as a parent, that I've been a parent a long time now, and I just reflect how often have I been a listener rather than an advisor, right? So that's note to self for sure. Blair, can you talk a little bit to one of the things I love about your book, Punks in Suits, is what you call radical empowerment.
Mm.
Can you bring that to life for us?
Yeah. I mean, that's what, just on this listening thing, absolutely essential. And somebody said here it's a skill. It is a skill. And one of the things that we do a lot of the time is we think we're listening because we're not speaking. But we're not really listening. We've got a very loud voice in our head that we're listening to, telling us all the ways that the person that's speaking is wrong and what we're going to say when they stop speaking. Um, and actually, the kind of listening I'm talking about, and you know this, Mark, because I said it when we were together in January, is listening so hard you might change your mind. You're that open to what you're hearing that you might change your mind about what you think, rather than I'm listening to convince, so I've got the ammunition to convince the other person they're wrong. So that's just something I wanted to throw in. But yeah, this radical empowerment. So this is exactly the piece. It's about people can only be as empowered as your willingness to give away power. You cannot say you're empowered, but obviously I'll hold on to the final decision if I don't like what it is that you're doing. So you have to be willing to give away power. That means giving away information, whatever you know, whatever, however you can connect them up with so they can get access to other information. You connect them up. You are the enabler, the facilitator, like you said. Um, and then you push the decision making out to the best person to make the decision, who is normally the person who will have to implement the decision. Because we all know of situations where a decision has come from on high, and the person that has to deliver it knows for an absolute fact that that is not going to work.
Mhm.
Information are on the ground, it's not going to work, but they have to implement it because it's come from their boss's boss. So we give people authority to make decisions that they are capable of making with the insight and experience that they have. And that means a tolerance to risk as well, because it means, well, they might make a wrong decision, or the decision might not play out in the way that they had anticipated. How will we help them then? How will we support them? How will we enable them to learn from that? Rather than, well, that didn't work out very well, give it back to me. It doesn't mean that the senior people don't have any decisions. They have the decisions that best sit with them, given their level of expertise and the access they have to information. But they're not making decisions on behalf of people who are best placed to make them.
Really cool. I'm going to do a mini summary of our first one, which is we are not all in this together unless, as a leader, I'm with my people way more. I think there was one point about be at the coffee machine, listen, talk, be there, share. So we're not all in this together. Don't assume that unless you've established trust first. And that takes a lot of time, energy, hard work, focus, and value-based behaviors. Note to self. So the next point and the next myth buster from you is it's not intellectual change, it's emotional. Tell us
Yeah.
more, Blair.
Well, if you look at any of the standard models of change, they're all about imparting information. So maybe you get input from people and that informs the change. Then you explain the why. This is why we're changing. And then people agree with the why, and then they implement the change in effect, and then you get the result. I've looked at all these models. They all, whether it's 8 steps or 3 steps, they're all basically doing that. But we know from our own lives that just because logically you know what the right thing is to do doesn't mean you actually do it. And health and well-being being the perfect example. I mean, we know that over a certain amount of chocolate and cake and pastries, is not good for us, but it's very hard not to do it, right? So we know logically, just because you know logically doesn't mean you'll change your behavior. The real change of behavior comes from an emotional shift. So you've changed your relationship in some way to whatever it might be. If we take the pastries, you now feel differently about them. And so now you can support change. It's not just willpower that's you're constantly saying to yourself, don't eat the pastries. You're thinking, nah, they don't make me feel good. I remember how I feel when I get back from events when I've overindulged on pastries, as a silly example. I don't feel good about myself when I'm not moving, or whatever it might be. It's a feeling. Um, and so, if we're going to drive change in organizations, and particularly changes of behavior, we have to tap into the emotion of people. That there has to be a meaning to it for them, and the meaning is going to be unique to them. So it's not about saying, here's why it matters to everybody, because doing this change will make us more money as a business. It's not even about saying, because it will make our clients, delighted to work with us, and it'll improve their lives. Some people are motivated by that at a heart level, but not everyone in the organization. People care about different things. Some people care about not letting their colleagues down. Some people care about doing really, really good quality work. Some people care about the job because it facilitates things outside of work for them. And so, what you're really trying to do if you're driving change is to help people, yourself first. Why does this matter to you at an emotional level? But also help others to do the same, and then help them to see how working towards this thing gets them that heart desire, in a sense, gets their sense of purpose, their sense of meaning met. And that way you're dealing with emotion. And when emotion comes up, you're not afraid of it. You don't try to logic your way out of it. You take the emotion that's coming up, let's say, I mean, I don't really believe in resistance to change, but it's a cliche, so let's use it. You notice resistance to change. Instead of just saying, hang on, let me just explain again why we're doing this because it makes perfect sense, you get curious about it. What's going on? What are you worried about? What are you seeing that maybe I'm not seeing? How's this affecting you? What's hard about this for you? And you start getting really curious. And then people can start to work through at an emotional level. And I mean, then you never have to issue another order again because people are in it with their hearts.
And to build on that, Alistair has posted in chat. I'd love you to build on this, Alistair, that he was with a 26-year-old entrepreneur yesterday who said exactly as you're saying, build culture, not control. Alistair, tell us just a little bit more about that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So I'm doing a series of interviews with uh, business, small business leaders, and we were talking about the early years of startups and what were the lessons that Jay is the guy's name. He learned from he says he tried employment, but he wasn't employable. He simply didn't have the mentality to survive in an office. He was a very creative guy, very restless guy, but he realized that um, it, if he was like that, others who he wanted to work for him were also like that. So you couldn't build a regular office environment. It would be ironic for him to come out of an office environment hating it, only to create an office environment that everybody else would create. So at the age of 26, he's realized, and he said this to me in a series of kind of, I extracted some learning points from his interview, and this was one of them. And I'm actually reading Blair's book at the moment, and it was ringing a few bells in my ear. I'm sure she would have been nodding wildly as he sat there. But this is the reflections of a 26-year-old. I was just blown away by the maturity. I've met some 55, 60-year-old business leaders that still don't get that.
Thank you, Alistair, for bringing that to life. Blair, what's your build on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think for one thing, when you're 26, you haven't necessarily been ground down by what's normal, and the kind of conventional wisdom. I also think there's something about this generation. I'm not hugely I don't want to put anyone in a box and say, oh, you're a Gen Z and therefore you're like this. But the evidence does point to, um, and Mark and I have talked about this because we both got kids in this generation, that they look at the way that older generations have worked and they say, no, thank you. I just don't, I just not going to do that with my life. And so then and that's one of the reasons that there's a big problem in attracting and retaining young people. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons that they come and they have a little look around and they're like, no, thank you. Culture is incredibly important to them. A sense of meaning and purpose from their work, making a difference, having a voice is incredibly important. And of course, it isn't just them. COVID did a number on our expectations of work, and we've all changed our attitude. There's a new metric now called the worth it metric, which basically is the calculation that people do in their heads to establish whether the sacrifice that they're being asked to make for their job is worth it. And very often they're saying, no, it isn't. So those organizations that can create a culture where the humanity and people can thrive, people are going to do the calculation and they're going to say, I'm not required to make a sacrifice. I mean, isn't it interesting that we sometimes call people's salary their compensation? As if we're sort of we're going to ask you to sacrifice your soul and we're going to compensate you for that with money. And it's just not adding up for a lot of people today.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a stat out there to reinforce this point about emotion and connecting emotionally. I'll do it again with as if it was a quiz just to get our brains ticking. Psychologists, and this is endless chat between two different sectors of psychology. What percentage as adults of our decisions are emotional as opposed to logical? So, as adults, what percentage of the decisions we make are based on emotion, not logic? Using chat for me, what do you think psychologists say? Cool, well done. I've got experts in the room. Well done. Yeah, there's a massive debate. Is it actually 91%? But there's a second group that says it's more like 95. So it is unbelievably high. And for those that think that's illogical, that we're smart humans and that we actually make most of our decisions based on logic. What happens is we base the decision on emotion and then we justify it with logic. And that's what psychologists say. It's fundamentally emotional. So if you're a leader, and this train analogy I really like, Blair, if you're a leader and you're at the front and your team are at the back, you've got the whole culture wrong. You're not with them enough, you're not listening enough, all the things we said in chat earlier, and you're not connecting emotionally. So it's pretty fundamental. I'd love to get your perspective now, because these are hopefully provocative. It's like we're not all in this together. Emotion's fundamental. And now, how come the next bit is body? What's the myth busting about body?
So I've come to this quite late in life. My school report for PE was Blair lacks all the skills required in the gym. So that, A for effort, E for attainment. So I have come to it quite late, but I have noticed. I mean, you can't fail to notice that work doesn't make us well. Let's put it that way. So now, a lot of people, myself included, get a huge sense of meaning and purpose from our work. I'm not saying taking away from that, but the typical way we work, even just from a physical perspective, the sitting and staring at screens, the working hours, the food that we eat at work, the food that we eat after work because of how we feel about work, the lack of time that we have to move or to go to the gym or to meet with friends or to do the things that we need to do for our families. I mean, you can do it, but you squeeze it into a tiny little amount of time because there's so much to do outside of work. This is fundamentally unhealthy, and it is based on a model of industrial age machines that all you really want people to do is to operate like a machine and put this thing into this box and then the next thing into this box, and they can do that for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever, and then you switch shifts. The work that we're asking people to do, and particularly because it's in a very uncertain and constantly changing environment where we're constantly asking them to be agile and adaptive, to learn and grow and change, to change their mind, to bring their humanity and their emotions and their ideas into work, to speak truth to power, to all of this kind of stuff. And plus to do a job that used to be done by 3 people and we're now expecting 1 person to do it. We're asking them to do all of that, but we've still got a way of working that suited doing machine-like work. And I think the toll that it's taking on, I mean, there's a lot of focus on emotional health, but the physical health of our people, and particularly the physical health of our leaders, the sacrifice that they've made to their health in order to do the job that they're doing. And because of the sacrifice they're making, they're not noticing the price that everyone in their organization is making and is paying, and they're not noticing the lost opportunity cost of that because they perceive it as normal. So if we want organizations and people within organizations, more importantly, that can ride change, that can cope with those very busy periods and periods where they are required to go above and beyond, and to bring their whole selves and all the other things we're asking of them, we've got to treat them like humans. And human beings need to move. They need to eat right. They need to get nutrition. They need to, in my case, lift heavy things in the gym. There are things that people need to do to be the best human and therefore the best human performer. And that is essential for change. When things are ticking over and it's predictable, maybe it's not so important. But when change is happening, which is all the time now, it's essential.
And as you speak, so many people are adding into the chat, which is really cool. And I would encourage people to scan down the chat as well, because it's building what Blaire says. There's lovely bits of advice in there. There's recommendations on books as well. So by all means, just adventure through the chat, because we've got lots of lovely advice coming through there. Blaire, I'd love you to share, because when we talked about you and your body, you made a massive transformation, because you look ripped now because you're working hard at it, and it's a focus for you for all the right reasons. But there was a time not so long ago where you would look in the mirror and you weren't particularly proud of what you saw. How did you make that huge transition to now? Well, you've got guns, haven't you? You could even show us your guns, actually. How did you make that transition?
Okay, so just to paint a picture, a colleague of mine who's also a coach, we do a lot of work together, and she reminded me recently that when we'd be traveling around, we'd be at the airport, whatever, about to fly somewhere, she would have to take my bag for me because I couldn't handle walking and pulling the bag at the same time. And I wasn't particularly overweight or anything. It's just I was mainly made of body fat, not muscle. And so things were hard. And I also have a hereditary condition, which does affect the strength in my legs, and grip strength and a few other bits and pieces. And so that was starting to really kick in, and it's degenerative. So it was starting to get worse and worse. So, I'd always tried lots of things, and I want to weave in Chester's point about personal choice. I tried lots of things, but it took a real wake up. So firstly, it sort of took my mum getting Alzheimer's and ultimately dying of Alzheimer's, which, if any of you have been through that or are going through that, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's the worst thing to live through. And I started to research, not how can you prevent Alzheimer's, because that's wishful thinking at this point, but what might be some of the things that contribute that you can take control of. There's what's in your influence and what isn't, right? My dad is also in a care home because of his physical abilities. He's in a wheelchair, he lives in a care home, he's very sharp mentally. But I had thought to myself, well, I'm going to end up in a care home, and I had bought into that as my future reality. I better start saving now. And I started to wonder whether that was inevitably my future. So it took something very personal And I started trying different things. So I did all the things that everyone does. I wore a glucose monitor for a while. I did keto for a while. Various things. And then eventually, about 2.5 years ago, I met a personal trainer who said, we're going to look at everything. So we're going to get you in the gym, but we're also going to help you lose body fat. We're also going to get you walking. We're going to sort out your water intake. We're going to look at your protein, your sleep, everything. And bit by bit layering on new behaviors to the point where now, of course, you don't know what the future holds, but I do not believe that it is an inevitability that I will end up in a care home. And that all of that got me looking at, to Chester's point, absolutely it's personal choice, but we can make it easier for people or harder for people. We can make it so that only those that are hugely motivated by something like my mum died of Alzheimer's, only those people who force the priority can do it. Or we can say, listen, we're going to make it a lot easier for people to take care of themselves by unpicking some of the stuff about the way we work that means that only those that are highly motivated can make it work. Remember, Mark, when we were in Athens, there was a guy there that brought his own snacks.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a really keen runner, and he had a bag of fruits and nuts or wherever he went.
It's Jason, yeah, Jason. Chester coaches Jason, yeah.
Yeah. You have to be that kind of person to do it, because you have to say no to the pastry. And as you're saying no to the pastries, someone's saying, "Oh, go on, it's a special day. We're away for a conference. Why? Is you've got to have fun." It's very hard. Whereas if you'd come out into the break, nothing wrong with the event. It was one of the best things I've ever been to. But the catering was what you always expect. If you came out, and sure, there were the pastries, but there was also some fruit, there was also some nuts, there was also some yogurt, there was also maybe some sliced meats. That would have been great. And then it would have been easy for people to find what they needed.
There's been an amazing pivot. My brain is recognizing this in this conversation. It kind of started with you're the leader at the front of the train trying to get people to come with you. And it's all about you, right? So it's all about how you treat yourself, how you take good care of yourself so that you can be the best leader possible of others. And that's why your transformation in body, how's that impacted you as a communicator?
Yeah. I think I feel more, so it's not just confidence because of how I look. I like the way I look, and I've worked quite hard to get the body that I have, and that was intentional. I had in mind the sort of body I wanted, and turns out you can sculpt your body however you want it, really. So within, your sort of genetics. I'm never going to be tall. Let's say that. But other than that, I can do quite a lot about it. But sorry, Mark, I slightly forgot the question. What was the question?
I was saying, how has it affected your communication? So your body is feeling great.
Yes.
How's that affected your behaviors and communication?
So of course, how I look, I feel confident, but it's that I did it. That I do it. That I hold myself to a certain standard of doing things that are not necessarily what other people do. And I'm pretty consistent about that. And that gives me faith in myself. If I can, so there's two parts of the gym. Anyone who goes to the gym, or anyone who's ever been to the gym, will know. There's the bit with all the cardio machines, and then there's the bit with all the weights, typically, especially the free weights. And all the women are in the cardio bit, and all the men and boys are in the free weights bit. And for me, that kind of gritting my teeth and going to the side with all the free weights, it's an action that then builds a new story about being able to face into something that feels uncomfortable and then make it comfortable to you. And if we think about that, going, the comfort zone, and all the learning happens outside the comfort zone. So if in your personal, let's say your well-being, you step outside your comfort zone, then the comfort zone grows. What is comfortable? There's more things now that are comfortable. When you do that in your personal life, then you can bring that learning into your business life. You can say, why am I going to that meeting? Just because it's expected of me? Why, why am I just eating whatever's served on a Wednesday, even though it's a pile of pasta and a cream sauce? Why am I limited to a certain view of what a leader looks like? Maybe I can get a bit uncomfortable about what I think of as a leader. So this kind of this way of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone in your personal life then translates. And there's just one thing I want to pick up on, Mark, sorry, just about it being personal. It is personal, but it's also systemic. And I think one of the things that differentiates a leader from maybe a non-leader or I was going to say individual contributor, but I mean, you can be a leader and an individual contributor. One of the things that differentiates is that leaders are not only looking at what they can do and how they grow, but what's going on systemically that needs to be disrupted and then leading a change around that. So yes, I benefit personally. And then I also look at what is going on in the system that needs to change so other people can change too.
Thank you. Yes, double whammy.
Mm.
What I'd love to ask everyone listening in, inspired by a lot of advice from Blair and in the chat, what one big change do you think you want to make for yourself? And that could be a skill, but it also could be a behavior or a physical intention. It could be anything, right? But I'd love you just to reflect now. If there's one big change you think, yeah, that's important for me now, what would that be? And it's me silent for just a little bit. Just what big change do you think would be important for you right now? I'm going to come back to Blair to ask you, Blair, just to not summarize really, but get really specific with us now in terms of, as leaders, what would you recommend we do more on the systemic side to make a real difference? My thinking on this is very much around the simplicity of ask before you tell. that's still a journey for me. So ask before you tell. That would be my tip to myself and to everyone else. Be an asker more than a teller. What are your top tips, Blair, in terms of systemic leadership change?
I would say, well, the question I've written down is to ask what's getting in the way. But what I really mean is to seek out tensions in the system where there's that crunchy, it's not working well for some reason, and there's some tension, there's some friction in the system. Instead of papering over it or ignoring it or putting in a new system to sort of plaster over it, go towards it. I think that's what leaders do. They go towards pain rather than moving away from it, and they get curious. And that's when they ask the question of the people who are experiencing the tension, what's getting in the way of this being a lot easier? What's getting in the way of this being optimal? And having people start to think about that, and then using coaching to say, okay, what ideas have you got for addressing that? And have them come up with tons of ideas, and then ask them, all right, where do you want to start? Where do you think is the best place to start? Have them make a decision about an action, but it's still just a pilot. So, okay, try it, and then we'll check in whatever is a useful time scale, see how it's gone. What did you learn? What do we need to change? Do we need to go back to the drawing board? So everything is a kind of iterative process, but you're, like you say, Mark, the question asker, but also the tension identifier. And then you're getting curious and asking other people to get curious too.
Yeah, one of the things you said that I hadn't heard of before today is the worth it monitor. Is it worth it? And the younger generations are consciously asking themselves that question and sometimes saying no. And certainly my generation were brought up to be hardworking and diligent and dutiful, which means you never ask, really, is it worth it? Or you might, but you never say no. You always crack on because that's your duty and it's the way things have always been around here. And the younger generation are actually leading us in a much better path to choice-based decision making, where the individual does make a judgment on is it worth it. And and they aren't trying to live a life in 20 years that should be a life in 80 years. So I think there's a lot to learn from people who are in their 20s. And if you don't sit down and ask them, you don't know things like those decision-making processes. Is it worth it, this thing? And if the leader hasn't clarified the why and the context, it's increasingly not worth it. And I see so many leaders that then judge those, let's call them younger people, and go, oh, they're lazy, aren't they? Oh, typical Generation Z, oh dear. And the reality is totally different. If you take the time to listen, and I think a little bit, as you just said, to completely not trash, but really examine the way we currently do it, or the old way, if you want to call it that, and say, is that right anymore? And it increasingly isn't. So Blair, I'm going to leave the last words with you on this. We've covered three main areas when we said, we're not all in this together. Big change comes from a place of emotion, not logic. And as a leader, if you get your body right, everything else can flow. Body and mind is one system. What final words of motivation and inspiration do you have for us, Blair?
I thought you summarized it so perfectly. I was going to leave you with the last word. What's one more thing? I mean, I think that this is a room full of very like-minded people. I'm not experiencing, I mean, unless you're the ones that are feeling this of being quiet, I'm not experiencing a lot of resistance to what I'm saying. So I think what therefore you guys need to do is to be willing to be uncomfortable, and for other people to be a bit uncomfortable with you, with what you're bringing. And you always ask yourself, if I'm going to go to this situation, I'm going to be there for a reason. I'm going to put something on the table. You're not always going to win the argument or convince other people to change their mind or whatever. But if you're not willing to put it on the table, there's no point in being there. And I think that we need people like you guys to start this conversation in the same way as people started the conversation 10 years ago, maybe, about mental health, or 15 years ago about mindfulness and meditation, or 25 years ago about coaching. So somebody has to start when it is unnormal, shall we say, until it becomes the new conventional wisdom. And you guys are those people.
That's brilliant. Thank you. We are a partnership. We're a partnership of companies, business doctors, Be Human and Uspire. We are here for any leaders who would like our help. So please just get in touch. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you found it as inspiring as I have, and wishing you a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.